What is this low-level unrest that needs to be addressed? And I think our politicians, the legislature, everyone is starting to awaken to the concept that we're dealing with something bigger than we thought, that alcoholism and addiction seem to be more of a symptom of an underlying problem. And to simplify it, I think what we're starting to address is a hope crisis. That this generation that everyone talks about right now, our 12 to 30-year-olds, seem to be a tough sell on the American dream. They no longer are buying the traditional model of get good grades, go to a good college, meet a nice husband and wife, have a nice house, 2 cars in the garage, and then the big end of the lie, right? ... and then you'll be happy. And we're starting to talk about that we are not fighting an opioid epidemic. We're fighting a hope epidemic.
Attorney Richard Brueckner served as Senior Assistant State's Attorney for the state of Maryland. He won more than 80 jury trials and achieved successful outcomes in thousands of other cases involving drug charges, drunk driving offenses, and weapons charges.
I think the way that my practice, and it's exactly that, a practice has unfolded, is that we seem to handle primarily DUI and drug-related cases. Last year, I know we did 357 DUI cases and a spattering of simple possession and what I would just call low-level alcohol and drug-related crimes. And when these folks end up sitting across from my desk, it's often they think of a bad day in their life. And I have a unique opportunity as an attorney, having a knowledge of the law combined with a knowledge of recovery, resources, and programs available to help the alcoholic and the addict. I think that we bring something special to a well-rounded, holistic approach to law, which may sound strange. That's not what people think of. I like to refer to us as a spiritual law firm, where we're addressing the entire person and what's going on in their life. Because often what's best for them legally may not be best for them as a person. I think the great majority, and I'm making up a statistic as it seems to me right now, probably 70% of these folks are first offenders who had an extra drink. I think a bottle of wine has maybe 5 glasses of wine in it, and maybe that's the night the husband had 3 and the wife had 2, and whoever had 3 is going to be over a 0.08. And this will be an eye-opening, life-changing, horrific experience for 70% of the people that come in front of me. And they want to get through this. They want to learn from it. They already have. We send our clients to a one-time Mothers Against Drunk Driving panel to have it hit their heart. We also send them to 12 hours of alcohol education. And this is for that first offender, the 70% that don't present as having any real problem with alcohol and will probably never do this again, are probably not in need of any long-term treatment, inpatient, outpatient, anything like this. I'll just call them citizens that made a mistake and learn a heck of a lesson and learn a little bit about alcohol and alcoholism and its effects, which, let's face it, that can't hurt anyone. The other 30% are the folks, multiple offenders, may or not be cluing in on the role of alcohol in their life, may be resistant to some of the process, and these are my favorites. These are These are the folks where we have a chance to make a difference in their lives and to introduce them to the fact that maybe there's more going on than the police just pulled them over and they were unlucky. I have a little plastic chart inside my desk that unfortunately I don't have with me, that it's something to the effect of 1 out of 10 people in their lifetime are going to have a contact with law enforcement that ends up in handcuffs. So that's 1 out of 10. If this is a second offense, it goes to an astronomical number. It's like 1 out of 2,800 people will ever have 2 contacts with law enforcement in their lifetime that lands them in handcuffs. When it comes to a third DUI, that number again goes exponential, and it's something like 1 out of 50,000 people is going to have an interaction with law enforcement that lands them in handcuffs. And this has nothing to do with innocence or guilt. This is just law enforcement contact that ends up in arrest, right? So now I'm looking at that person and going, that's on their third or fourth DUI, and by number 4, that 50,000 goes to something like 1 in 450. Like, it gets crazy. Hey, so do you think this is just bad luck? Like, these are the numbers. And I'm able to, kind of lay that out a little bit, ask them what else is going on in their life. Usually by offense number 3 or 4, there's a whole lot of collateral damage in their life. There's some jobs I can talk to them about. You lost a job. How's the marriage? How's the relationship with the kids? Can't help but notice you didn't have a driver's license when you got pulled over this time. You're also driving suspended. Was that an accident as well? And just to slowly kind of turn the conversation to some type of self-reflection and self-realization. Also, the judicial system and really the legislature in Maryland has done a nice job that in the DUI process over the years, by the time you've had 1 or 2, you're going to go to a statutorily mandated alcohol class. So you're going to have probably heard of some of the 12-step programs by this point in your, DUI career. And of course, if you refer to something if you have anything called a DUI career, that might be a hint. Most people, don't have that to refer to. And, you've been exposed, which is great. Because you have to be, by statute, a Mothers Against Drunk Driving class. So these folks, by the time I'm talking to them for their second, third, fourth, fifth offense, they know what's out there. They may have been initially resistant to it, and that's not for me. That's for repeat offenders or people that have a real problem with alcohol. And then I get to tactfully go, well, you look an awful lot like the person you're describing. And usually the consequences and everything else in their life are to a point where they become open to that. We do not have recreational marijuana, but we do have medical marijuana in Maryland. It's actually a $50 civil citation, the same as a parking ticket. If you have less than 10 grams of marijuana, you can't be arrested. You're going to get a $50 ticket. And sent on your way, and you pay it. There's no associated criminal history with that. It is a civil, citation, very similar to a parking ticket, which would carry no points on your license or anything like that. To get a medical marijuana card, you have to be diagnosed as someone having, a headache or stress or for some of the things I think we all have, but I'm no doctor. I'm not going to go into that. The neat thing about the driving under the influence or driving impaired, we also have, being a beach community, we have a lot of folks that love to retire to the ocean. And if you are the mother of a child or a relative that's killed by a drunk driver, and I'm going to change that. I'm going to say an impaired driver. Does it really matter whether you are dealing with an 80-year-old who did not take their blood pressure medicine and that's why they swerved over and hit your loved one head on, or they took too many of their legally prescribed, blood pressure, metformin for diabetes, marijuana for their glaucoma, or 4 beers instead of 2 beers? Does that really matter? And what the law actually addresses, it's driving under the influence of alcohol and or drugs. And we do not distinguish necessarily whether it is a legally prescribed drug, whether it is a street drug, or whether it's alcohol, because does it really matter, right? The spirit of the law is that we want safe driving and people not dying. So yeah, I get quite a few cases of people that are impaired by their own legally prescribed medication or impaired by their legally prescribed marijuana.
What do you think, Rich, is the relationship these days in terms of the police and the treatment communities? Are they talking to each other? Are they not talking to each other? Are there things that you think could be improved to make the world in Maryland a safer place?
Gosh, that's the $1 million question. We have come a long, long way in the last 10 to 15 years as a state and as a nation in attending these conferences. I love the PTAC initiatives to see what other states are doing, to hear about what other counties are doing, hearing what's working and what's not. And that's the real value, is bringing states and counties together on a national level. I think law enforcement recognizes that what used to be referred to as the war on drugs, if there was such a thing, is over. I don't know a single law enforcement officer that would say anything like we're winning, we're making a difference, we've really cut down on drugs in the United States. I don't know many officers, and I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of wonderful law enforcement officers that feel good about locking up an alcoholic or a drug addict. It's just as the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu used to say, when your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And up until the last decade and a half, we've given them one tool: jail, right? That's all they had. It's 2 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. You have someone highly under the influence, a danger to themselves, a danger to others, a danger to the community. Where do they take this person? What do they do? The term 24-hour access to treatment is a relatively new one to Maryland in the last decade, just that concept. And then once the concept is presented, which we were able to present to Maryland with a general outline given to us in Maryland by C4 and some documents they were kind enough to send, we became familiar with the concept and the collaborative efforts that were going to be required. So I think my general experience is law enforcement is eager to have an alternative. It also became clear to us by trial and error. We learn a lot by mistakes, and life is lived forwards and understood backwards. Law enforcement was not the tough sell we thought it would be. And we had law enforcement on board almost before we were prepared for them to be on board, because they said, okay, we understand the PTAC concept, we understand diversionary efforts, we're with you, PTACers. Now what do we do with this guy in the back of my car? And so we sort of had the cart before the horse. And then we learned there was a whole lot of infrastructure, funding, different revenue streams, getting private funding to talk with local governments. Where are we going to take these people? Who is going to pay the social services workers of whichever variety you choose to staff these facilities with. Where are the facilities going to come from? What buildings? Who's going to be available at 3, 4 in the morning? Who's going to help shepherd these folks into treatment? So it's great that you want us to do something else. We are all on board. You tell us what to do and we'll do it. And that seems to be the legitimate law enforcement perspective.
So then the treatment community's got some push-ups to do.
Yes. I think that they have accepted their role as to protect and serve, and that's not to say that there's not the, 1 in 100 police officers that likes chasing down a drunk and tackling him and throwing him into the drunk tank like we did 50 years ago, and I got me another one. But that is not my experience with the vast majority of law enforcement officers. They're going, hey, if you guys get your act together and show us where we can take them and how we can help, we would love to do it.
Drunken people doing silly things that are dangerous and even lethal is a huge nuisance to the police and the legal system. No?
Well, and a tremendous financial burden. And legally speaking, you spend all that money, and a lot of crimes require a mens rea, or the state of mind of intent and criminal culpability, which alcohol and drugs negate. So by the time you actually come to trial, voluntary intoxication is a defense to the crime. So at the end of the day, you've spent all of the time, the incarceration, the money, the legal resources, and as a prosecutor, which I used to be for a decade, you end up losing at trial because a drunk often doesn't have the intent required to do the crime they were doing. And at the end of the day, it's a long loss or a slow loss, right? And at which point are we going to recognize this?
You reflect on your life's work. What does the future look like?
I had the wonderful opportunity this weekend here to meet with some folks from C4 and some of the other initiatives. One of them is called the IT initiative, and what the future has to look like is the conversation has to change to the next level, right? We have to become a little bit more sophisticated and say, why, right? Why are these folks using alcohol and drugs, or their cell phones all the time, or eating, or whatever it is, whatever this of addiction and alcoholism and our general state of the nation. That's how big it gets, right? As if you go, hey, oh, that's great. How are we doing as a nation? And it seems to me that we are starting to open our eyes to almost a national awakening on some level of we're going to have to start having this conversation. That clearly alcohol fixes something for a percentage of our population. Drugs fix something inside for these folks. What is that? Right? What is that? And if it's not alcohol and drugs, there is this thing that I think we're starting to talk about as a nation that is driving, I would call it a low-level unrest within much of our country and possibly humanity as a whole. What is this low-level unrest that needs to be addressed? And I think our politicians, the legislature, everyone is starting to awaken to the concept that we're dealing with something bigger than we thought, that alcoholism and addiction seem to be more of a symptom of an underlying problem. And to simplify it, I think what we're starting to address is a hope crisis that this generation that everyone talks about right now, our 12, really 12 to 30-year-olds, seem to be a tough sell on the American dream. They no longer are buying the traditional model of get good grades, go to a good college, meet a nice husband and wife, have a nice house, 2 cars in the garage, and then the big end of the lie, right? Dot, 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 and then you'll be happy. And we're starting to talk about that we are not fighting an opioid epidemic. We're fighting a hope epidemic. And as we figure out a way to address and restore hope in our communities and in our respective states, I think we're going to see all of these symptoms that we would call alcoholism, addiction, and any of the other diseases, I think we're going to see them reduce. And I think we are slowly figuring out ways to reinfuse hope into our communities. I know that each day I spend some time, roughly 20, 30 minutes before my 2-year-old and 5-year-old come to life at 5:30, and my responsibility as dad and husband, and I kiss my wife and make the pancakes and get the kids dressed for school and brush the hair. I try to get that 20 to 30 minutes where I'm awake before anyone else and spend some time remembering and refocusing what true north is for me, so that I can follow true north. I think a lot of times when we don't take the time to reflect and remind ourselves in quiet reflection each day what true north is, we can get off by just a little bit. And if you get off by just a quarter of a degree over a decade, you're in an entirely different place, right? Than if you realign each day. I truly believe that I've been put here to just try to make a little difference in one struggling person's life to the best of my ability. And if I'm coming from a place of helpfulness and compassion, I don't think we can go wrong. I think the biggest blessing that perhaps I bring to the table is having the experience of being a longtime prosecutor, then a defense attorney, being involved with initiatives like PTAC and some of C4's to be well-rounded in the whole person rather than the mechanics and minutia of law. And there is one thing to be a great lawyer. And by being a great lawyer, you can do a tremendous disservice to your client's true needs as a human being if you are not exposed to, however you become exposed to them, whether it's through personal life experience, personal struggles, education, conferences, understanding what all is available and what the most comprehensive approach to your client's needs are, both for the judiciary and for your client to not reoffend and to have a happy and successful life, thereafter. And I think that's why I love what I do. Is been there and done that on both sides, and thanks to things like this conference, I'm very familiar with lots of alternatives for lots of different clients that may truly benefit them, rather than just navigate the system. And I don't think a lawyer that is doing that, navigating the system, is in any way, malicious, or it's more of just uninformed. I like the word that I've learned through some spiritual practice, agnostic, coming from the Greek word ag, without, and gnostic, with knowledge. There's no connotation to that word. It's just a person who's without knowledge. And there's a lot of people practicing law that are great right, at statute and code and motions law, and they're just not aware of all of the other forms of recovery and options and programs that are available for their clients. I just appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to have, I feel blessed to have had the chance to learn from C4, PTAC, and to have my clients benefit from what organizations like this have done to help create an informed attorney capable of doing a better job for my clients through initiatives like this.
What about bar associations? How can lawyers, how can PTAC, C4, how can you engage a lot of the bar associations, which might have an effect on more lawyers?
I guess I'll just speak from personal experience. What happens in the state of Maryland, we have, our thing is called the Lawyers Assistance Program, the LAP. Many states have these. I've actually had the privilege of traveling the country and speaking at well over a dozen states that have these programs through their local, their state's bar association. A lot of states call them LCL programs, Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. The Ethics Committee on the Maryland State Bar, folks that are compelled and driven, by their heart, that care, get on these committees, serve, right? It's part of developing a heart and a life of service. This goes back to the True North question. If I'm following my True North, I know that I have served now for over a decade on Maryland's Bar Association's Lawyers Assistance Program, and that if there's an attorney about to be disbarred or in ethical trouble or entering the bar, wants a license, they come in front of the board and we get to evaluate whether this person is struggling with alcoholism and addiction or if they are of poor moral character, right? And who do you want making those decisions, right? Do you want someone that this is an academic exercise, that they have no experience with that at all? Or do you want some folks well-versed in recovery, diversion, the ability to differentiate a bad person from a person struggling with alcohol and drugs? And I think we have as much vested interest in Maryland as anywhere else, and not having anyone with any moral character failings being an attorney, and spotting that person versus spotting the alcoholic is a valuable asset. So my 2 cents there is get involved. These things are all for free and for fun. If you care, put your feet where your mouth is, get on these committees, serve your state bar association. We effectuate change from within, right? Not throwing rocks outside, talking about how it should be or could be. Get on these committees and serve.